thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate you here tonight, and we wanted to make sure to record this for residents that couldn't join us tonight. And so I'm very appreciative. I'm Susan Edstrom, I am chairman of the shelter board, and I manage the lost found page for the town of Trophy Club when they're lost or found pets. And with us tonight is Bonnie Bradshaw, and she is a Texas master naturalist and a certified wildlife rehabilitator. She's president of 911 Wildlife, launched in 2006. They provide fast, affordable, humane wildlife solutions for homeowners and property managers. And she's going to be talking to us tonight about preventing coyote conflict. And so I want to bring Bonnie up and let her go through her presentation. And we'll have time for questions at the end as well.
Thank you. All right. Good evening. As Susan said, my name's Bonnie Bradshaw, and I'm with 911 Wildlife. And we take about, depending on the time of year, we get anywhere from 20 to 50 phone calls a day about urban coyotes, because we cover the whole Dallas-Fort Worth area and Houston. So it's not just happening in Trophy Club. It's something that's happening in cities throughout North America. So I'm going to talk first of all about the difference between intuition and science. If I have intuition on one hand, that's all about feelings and what feels like would be the logical way things are happening, right? But intuition is all about feelings. And on the other hand, I have science. And science is about radio collars and facts and studying animals and finding out what's really going on, not just what we feel would be logical, okay? And then the other thing is the difference between basing our actions on fears or basing our actions on facts. As human beings, we do a lot better when we base our actions on facts. Because when we're motivated by fear, that's when we're much more likely to make mistakes. Okay? All right, so I'm going to cover why they're in the city. I'm going to cover the bad news, which is what doesn't work, and we've got lots of history and lots of data on what doesn't work. I'm going to talk about the good news, which is what does work. So that, in a nutshell, is what I'm going to cover tonight. Okay, so the first thing is that when we build new shopping centers and new highways and new housing developments, most of the native animals in those areas disappear. They cannot adapt to the type of concrete we pour and the type of non-native plants that we put in. So there's a lot of animals that just cannot cohabitate with humans. However, there's a few species that not only adapt to an urban environment, they thrive in it. And these are the urban adapters as far as mammals go. I've got a whole nother presentation on birds. But as far as mammals, these are the mammals that thrive in residential neighborhoods. 50 times more squirrels, raccoons, possums, cottontail rabbits in the city than out in a rural area. They find more food, they find more den sites, they have larger litters, more of their offspring survive in residential neighborhoods rather than out in an undeveloped area. Okay, so we've already got some counterintuitive things going on here. Okay, so Susan said we were going to have the room until midnight, so I'm going to cover all of these. No, we're going to focus just on coyotes tonight, but I'm more than happy to answer questions on any of these. Okay, so this is a typical urban coyote situation, and you know, depending on the person's experience, when they see this photo, they may see different things. Some people may see this picture and go, oh, that poor coyote, we need to rescue it because it's stranded in the city, and it would be so much happier if we captured it and took it out in a rural area and released it. Other people may look at that and say, oh, that coyote, I bet it's going to attack a child. Other people may see this picture and go, oh my gosh, that's a wolf. Right? Because those are the kind of calls that we get. And when somebody calls and says they just saw a wolf, we all know what happened to Little Red Riding Hood, right? And there's an interesting thing that happens in our brain. When we see something that we don't expect, when we're startled, that animal gets much larger than it actually is. And so we get lots and lots of calls from people who say, I just saw this animal and it had to be at least 100 pounds, it had to be at least the size of a German Shepherd. I know you get these calls too. But what they're actually seeing is a coyote. And they're thriving, like I said, not just in Trophy Club, but in every city throughout North America. And why? Why is that happening? Why are coyotes in the middle of the city? Sometimes in old established neighborhoods, there's coyotes. Okay, we are very fortunate that 15 years ago, they got funding in Chicago to study urban coyotes. Has anybody here ever lived in Chicago? Well, the other miracle is that that funding for that study didn't get misappropriated. It actually got spent on studying urban coyotes. So 15 years ago, this group started capturing urban coyotes, putting radio collars on them, and tracking their movements. So the study is still ongoing, but we now have over 900 coyotes in Metro Chicago wearing radio collars. And they've been studied for 15 years. So that produces a tremendous amount of data. And the hypothesis when this study began was that urban coyotes were living in the city by eating cats and garbage. That was the hypothesis. That's intuition, right? That must be what they're doing in the city, is they're eating cats and garbage. Well, now fast forward 15 years, and what this study has shown is that more than 40% of their diet is rodents. And that's why they're thriving in the city, because there's 50 times more rodents around human structures than there are out in an undeveloped area. Okay? Fruit. Who knew that coyotes had a very strong sweet tooth? And at the end of summer, when the fruit trees have ripe fruit on them, fig trees, plum trees, persimmon trees, coyotes will come from a long way away because they have that incredible canine sense of smell, and they can smell that ripe fruit. And they will come from a long way away to eat that fruit when it's ripe. Rabbits, that's not a surprise, and we certainly have lots of cottontail rabbits in residential neighborhoods. Birds, insects. During the summer, coyotes will thrive on eating crickets and grasshoppers and June bugs and cicadas. This is a very adaptable animal, and that's why it's thriving in the city. Okay, so where are the cats and the garbage? Pardon me? Well, if it's not secured, there's lots of animals that will eat garbage. But on a regular basis, this is what an urban coyote is eating. So what this study, like I said, it's still ongoing, but what it's already proven is that coyotes in the city live longer, healthier lives than their country cousins. And this study has tracked, like I said, 900 coyotes. They know which pairs are mated. They know where the den sites are. They know where the territories are and which territories overlap. There's a tremendous amount of data. And if you'd really like to dive into it, it's all online. All you have to do is Google Chicago coyotes, and it will bring up the data. Okay? All right, so what's killing the cats? Because obviously, there's a lot of cats that go missing. And if it's not the coyotes killing them, what is? This is the top 3 dangers to free-roaming cats. And of course, there have been lots and lots of studies showing that indoor cats live much longer, healthier lives than outdoor cats. But where's the predation by wildlife? It's number 7. Right below cruelty inflicted by humans, which is a very, very sad situation. Okay? So yes, coyotes do occasionally take cats, but it's not near the numbers that are attributed to them. And the other thing to realize is that coyotes are extremely intelligent, and they much prefer to go after food that doesn't fight back. Okay? Because if they get injured, if they get bitten, or if they get scratched, it could end up being a fatality for them, because it's going to get infected, it's going to inhibit their ability to hunt. So coyotes also are scavengers. And so that's sometimes the reason the cat disappears is because it was hit by a car, but then the coyote took advantage of the situation. But it's much more likely that the cat was killed by a car than by a coyote. Okay. So if somebody's feeding outdoor cats, do you think this is a good idea? Just pouring the food out on the ground like that? Well, number 1, remember that canine sense of smell. Coyotes can smell cat food from a long way away. And so if there's cat food being poured outside, the coyotes are going to come for the cat food. So if somebody is feeding outdoor cats, the important thing is to only feed them during the day. There's a tradition about putting cat food out at night. That's a very bad habit. If you're monitoring outdoor cats, you want them to come during the day for a very short period of time and then pick up any uneaten food. Because any food that's left outside overnight is going to attract the entire spectrum of wildlife. Not just coyotes, but also skunks, everybody. Everybody likes to eat cat food, as far as wildlife is concerned. And indoor cats, like I said, live much longer, healthier lives. If you're trying to transition an outdoor cat into being an indoor cat, there's lots of support for that. There's lots of information on how to transition the cat to being happy and healthy indoors. And that's really the only way to keep a cat safe. Even if there weren't coyotes in the neighborhood, there are lots of great horned owls, there are lots of bobcats, there are lots of other animals that may see cats as either a territorial threat or as a prey animal. So bottom line is, I have 3 cats, and I would be devastated if anything happened to them, and that's why they never set foot outside, because it's just not safe for cats to be outside. Okay, so let's talk about small dogs. If the dog is under 15 pounds, it should never be on a leash longer than 6 feet. These expandable leashes are a really bad idea for many different reasons, but it's especially a bad idea if you have a small dog, especially Dachshunds, Jack Russells. It seems like there's a lot, Yorkies. It seems like there's a lot of small dogs that have a tremendous amount of attitude, way more attitude than is healthy for them. And what we see is the person is on one of these expandable leashes, and the little dog goes racing off into the bushes, and that's where the coyote is. And of course, the coyote's going to defend itself. And that's the only time we see dogs being injured while on a leash, if it's more than 6 feet. That's a very bad combination. If you have a pet door, and you have a dog that weighs under 15 pounds, that dog should never be outside unsupervised. So a pet door and a dog under 15 pounds is a very bad combination, because that dog should not be going in and out when you don't know that it's outside. Okay? Should never be outdoors unsupervised. Okay, so is it a threat? Are coyotes a threat to people? Because that's always what people are concerned about. It's like, well, if it's, eating the rats and the rabbits and the squirrels, then is it going to attack a child next? Is it a progression? where they're going to get more and more bold in the city, and then the next thing we know, there's going to be a child that's injured. Well, about 5 people per year get bitten by coyotes in the United States. And mostly it's in Southern California. And there's a very specific reason for that. There are a lot of folks in Southern California that want to bond with nature. And, you know, the ultimate way to bond with nature is to feed it. And the ultimate accomplishment is, I got it to eat out of my hand. Now we're brothers. We've bonded. Well, unfortunately, the coyote doesn't know where the food stops and the fingers start. And that's what we see in these bite incidents in Southern California. They've all been connected to hand feeding. Okay? The good news is that unlike wolves, coyotes, especially coyotes in the city, do not hunt in packs because the food that they're going after is not big enough to share. So they don't hunt in a group in the city because they're going after, remember, rats, rabbits, squirrels, small birds. That's not a pack. That's not something that would feed a pack. So it's completely different behavior than what we see in wolves. Just to put it in perspective, that's the dangerous animal in our midst, unfortunately. When folks call us and say that they saw a coyote in the neighborhood, I say, okay, but have you seen any stray dogs? Because that's the dangerous animal that could bite somebody and could, as we saw in Dallas last week, could even kill somebody. Okay? So it's not the coyotes that are dangerous. It's the stray dogs. Okay, so just to give you an idea about, because people usually always ask about rabies, and could we have a rabid coyote in the area? So this is for all 4 counties, going all the way back to 98. There have been 132 coyotes tested. So out of that 132 from those 4 counties, how many do you think have come back positive? You're right, none. And there's a very specific reason why we don't have a problem with rabies in coyotes. And it's because back in the 90s, money was set aside every year to drop an oral rabies bait all along the border. So that blue mark on the map, every January, airplanes fly all along the border and drop a bait that is specifically attracted to canines, dogs, foxes, coyotes, and vaccinates them against rabies. Now the pink area and the orange area is where they're doing an experimental program dropping bait for skunks and foxes specifically. And so that's really the only animal in North Texas that we have to be concerned about are skunks. And so if this program works out well around Houston, they'll expand it to other areas, but it's just beginning right now. Oh, the yellow part is foxes. Mm-hmm. The pink is skunks, and the yellow is foxes. And then the blue is the coyotes and canines. Okay, so that's a good use of our tax dollars every year. All right, so generally when we talk about coyotes in the city, most people, the first thing that gets thrown out there is, why can't we just capture the coyotes in the city and take them out to some rural area and release them out there where they belong? Okay? Intuition, you know, it seems like it would be a good idea, right? Well, it's been done a lot. A lot of cities have spent a lot of money relocating coyotes. And it doesn't work. This is just a small study of 12 coyotes that were part of the study in Chicago. And 100% mortality rate within 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, all 12 of them were dead. And that also is true with other species of animals. Whether you're relocating squirrels, raccoons, possums, any animal that is got a territory, that has a territory, if you trap it and take it to someplace that it's unfamiliar with, there's two things that happen. First of all, that animal is completely disoriented. It's going to try and get back to where it came from. It's going to cross roads that it's not familiar with. And we know what that ends up with. Also, the animal is seen as an invader by the other animals that are already in that territory. And so that's the other way that they die, is in territorial battles. So trapping and relocating is not really a humane thing to do, no matter what species we're talking about. Very low survival rate. Nature hates a vacuum. If the animal is trapped and taken away, what we've found is that just puts up a flashing vacancy sign. And sometimes within a matter of days, another coyote has moved in and taken over that territory. Because there's always subadults looking for an available, undefended territory to take over. And also in Texas, it's against the law. So there's not any relocation program for coyotes in Texas. And that's mainly to prevent any spread of diseases by taking a coyote from this area and moving it someplace else. Okay, so this is a typical scenario that happened outside of Chicago, where a small dog was killed by a coyote, and it was in a suburb. If you're familiar with Chicago, you may know where Wheaton is. It's got a lot of news coverage, and people were very upset about this dog being killed by a coyote. So the city responded and said, okay, we'll do something about this. After there was people showed up at the city council meetings and said, if it took this dog, now next it's going to attack a child and we need to do something. You can see how that would play out in a small town. Okay, so the city said, all right, we're going to hire a trapper, and they killed 4 coyotes. Okay? So the trapper said, all right, now I think this is going to solve the problem because we've eliminated the 4 coyotes that were in the immediate vicinity. People were very upset about the coyotes being killed, and they didn't want their tax dollars spent that way. It's very expensive to hire a person to kill coyotes in a residential neighborhood, as you can imagine. But the reason for the problem was not addressed. There were not educational programs like this to teach people about how to keep their pets safe. So guess what happened? That was in February, and then in November, another dog was killed. So this is a perfect example of how killing coyotes doesn't solve the problem. Because just like trapping and removing, it just puts up a flashing vacancy sign for another coyote to move in. If the human behavior doesn't change, the animal behavior is going to continue. So that was in November. Yeah, March. From March to November. And it happened again. Okay, so look at that litter size. Coyotes normally have a litter of 6. But when there's hunting and trapping going on, there's a very strange phenomenon that happens with coyotes. The remaining females double the size of their litters. And that's why killing and removing coyotes is counterproductive, because it actually prompts the remaining females to produce more embryos. Now, what holiday happens in the middle of February? Valentine's Day. Coyotes celebrate Valentine's Day. They're very romantic. And the other thing this study in Chicago has shown is that there is no divorce in coyote marriage. There is not even any fooling around in coyote marriage. But they have a secret. The male and the female work very hard together all during the spring and summer to raise those pups. In the fall, when the pups disperse to go find their own territories, the male and female take a break from each other. And they'll go to adjoining but separate territories. So we could learn a lot from coyote marriage. But in February, we always get a huge spike in calls about coyotes for a couple of different reasons. First of all, they're calling for each other. The male and the female will be calling for each other because they're reestablishing those pair bonds. They're saying, hi, remember me? Let's do that again this year. Okay? And the Latin name for coyote translates to singing dog. Coyotes have 11 different vocalizations. So the call that we usually get, and I'm sure it's the call that Kelly gets too, is that there's an entire pack of coyotes over in that vacant lot or over in that wooded area or over down by that creek, that there's an entire pack of coyotes. It's got to be at least 5 or 6 of them, right? And it's just 2 coyotes making 11 different sounds. And a lot of the sounds that they make are very harsh to our ears. And so a lot of times people interpret that sound as, oh my gosh, they're tearing some poor animal apart. It's the victim it's making those sounds. But that's not the case.
They sing every day when the church bells go off,
Mm-hmm.
and every time the fire department turns on their sirens.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, it sounds like 20 coyotes.
Yes. Yes. And some of it is yipping and howling, but some of it is screeching. And so that's why people always think, oh my gosh, this is horrible. There's some poor animal being devoured out there. But it's the coyotes making that sound. That's the coyote love song. So if you hear that screeching, very harsh sound, it's the coyotes making that sound. Okay, so this is a typical family scenario with the pups and the mother and the father. Like I said, this is one of the few mammal species where the male works as hard as the female. Think about it. Okay, so USDA Wildlife Services, this is a government agency, and they kill 90,000 coyotes every year in this country. Out of that 90,000, 20,000 are in Texas. And this is just government employees. This does not include private individuals or private companies that kill coyotes. This is just government employees. So what effect has this had? And this has been going on for 200 years. I mean, our tax dollars have been trying to eradicate coyotes from this country for 200 years. What's the result? We now have more coyotes in this country than we ever did before. And it's because of that phenomenon of the remaining females doubling the size of their litters. Because there's coyotes, used to, in the 1800s, there were only coyotes west of the Mississippi. But now we even have coyotes in Central Park in New York because they are thriving in development. They are thriving in and around human structures. Yes?
Do they drop off like any kind of birth control?
No. No. There's not a canine birth control that could be dropped. No. Unfortunately not. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, but there is okay, now we're ready for the good news. Okay, we've gotten through all the bad news. Here's the good news. There are very effective ways to eliminate coyote sightings in residential neighborhoods. Number one, we want to restrict that concentrated food supply. Animals, and some people, always live by a very, very strict equation. Okay, here's the equation. They've got to get the most amount of nutrition for the least amount of energy expended. Guilty? Okay? But it's life or death for animals. Because if they spend a lot of energy and don't get very much nutrition for it, they starve. I mean, it's cut and dried. They've got to conserve their energy and go for concentrated food. But if we eliminate that concentrated food, then the habitat is no longer suitable. On top of that, we're going to eliminate access to den sites. And then the third ingredient is, has anybody been in a fraternity? This is a little bit different kind of hazing. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear. Okay, so let's talk about that food supply. I don't know if you can tell or not, but the bottom of this picture, all of that is sunflower seeds. So what's hanging right above that? Bird feeder. Bird feeder. I always tell people, if you have an overflowing bird feeder, there's the day shift and then there's the night shift. The birds and the squirrels come during the day, the rats come at night. When people call me, pardon me? And the snakes in the morning. It's all about the food chain. It's all about the food chain. I always tell people that if you want to have a bird feeder, the key is to put out a small amount of seed in the morning so that it's completely gone before dark. Because otherwise, you're attracting rats. And if you don't believe me, game cameras only cost $40. Put a game camera out by your bird feeder, and I will promise you this is what you will get pictures of. I wish I had $1 for every person who called me and said, there's construction going on in that field over there, and we're being inundated with rats. And my response to them is always, how long ago did you put up the bird feeder? It doesn't have anything to do with that construction, because the rats that are over there in the field, they never come up around houses. The rats and mice that we have in and around our houses are commensal rodents. They are not native. They're roof rats, they're Norway rats, they're house mice. I know it seems somehow more pleasant to say, oh, it's just a field mouse. It's not. It doesn't come from the field. It comes from house to house to house. And having a bird feeder is that concentrated food that causes them to have larger litters and have litters more often, and more of their offspring survive. So it causes the rat population to explode. Okay? If they're left outside at night, yeah, dog bones would also be a food supply for rats. This is a really good diagram. I don't know if you can read it, but I'm more than happy to email it to. I'll email it to Susan, and that way she can distribute it. But these are all the most common things that attract rodents. And some of them are things that you might not think about. And I apologize in advance because this is really gross. But see that one that's up in the corner there? If you have a dog and there's a corner of the yard that doesn't get picked up, that's a buffet for rats. Because the dog food that we feed our pets is so concentrated that a lot of it passes through the dog undigested, and the rats have no scruples. So that could also, if you don't have a bird feeder, but you've got a rat problem, that could be the reason why. Double fencing, there's a lot of communities that outlaw double fencing because it provides a perfect habitat for rats in between your fence and your neighbor's fence. Things like that can provide ample shelter for mice and rats. So this is a really good diagram to use as kind of a checklist to make sure that you're not inadvertently causing the rat population to increase. Because if there's a good supply of rats, then that's where the coyotes are going to be. Okay. Den sites. This is a typical coyote den underneath a shed. For urban coyotes, they are completely adapted to living around human structures. So underneath a shed, underneath a deck, behind pool equipment. One of the pairs of coyotes that they've been studying in Chicago, its den site was on the second floor of a parking garage. Very adaptable animal. They find nooks and crannies, and that's where they give birth. Okay. So how we would solve that, we would put in an L-shaped barrier around the edge of the deck or around the edge of the shed. that permanently prevents animals from digging underneath there. So this would also prevent skunks and armadillos and other animals that dig burrows. So this permanently eliminates access to the den site. Okay, so this is now when we're going to talk about hazing. Okay, so this is a typical urban coyote out in broad daylight. Obviously, there's a person standing right there in the yard, and the coyote is just looking at him. This is urban coyote behavior, because out in a rural area, if a coyote shows itself in broad daylight around people, what happens to it? Gets shot, gets eliminated from the gene pool. But urban coyotes have learned, they are very intelligent, and they've learned they can be out in the middle of the day hunting squirrels and walk by a group of people, and the people will do one of two things. They'll either pull out their phone and take pictures, or they'll run inside.
Or they'll call me and tell me there's a rabid coyote.
Yes, in broad daylight, yes. Okay, so when we respond by pulling out a little box and pointing it at the coyote, or by running inside, what does that teach the coyote? That it's alpha. We're teaching these coyotes that they're king. They're very intelligent, and they pick up on all of our patterns and all of our behavior because it's a matter of life and death for them. So the good news is that behavior is very easy to change, and that's where the hazing comes in. So it can be if you go for a walk on a regular time and you see coyotes on a regular basis, carry a little air horn, a whistle, pots and pans. If you see a coyote in your yard, grab the water hose, spray it with water. There's another tool that works really well because it shoots 30 feet, super soakers. But I'm out walking in my neighborhood and I don't have a super soaker with me. I don't have a whistle. I don't have an air horn. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use my body. I'm going to wave my arms, I'm going to clap my hands, and I'm going to say, get. Just like you would tell a dog to get off the couch. Get. And you can even do this in a dress and high heels. And this teaches the coyote to stay away from the neighborhood, to stay away from people, and that's the result. Now, is this just a theory? Is this just, something that we're going to experiment with and see if it works? No. This has been proven effective all across the country. In neighborhoods and cities where they probably in the past wasted a lot of money on trappers or hunters, tens of thousands of dollars in some cities, and it didn't work. It made the situation worse. So then they were ready to try something different. And this combination of eliminating food sources, eliminating den sites, and using hazing as a negative experience for the coyotes eliminated the sightings. That's a much more effective way to make the habitat inhospitable for coyotes. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
That was awesome. If you ask a question, I am going to give you the mic only because we are recording this, and I want people to be able to hear your question and not just Bonnie's answer. And I'm going to ask the cute little lady in the back of the room to come up because I didn't get to introduce her before. Yeah, come on up. So from the back of the room, we had some input on calls that she gets that were very similar to what Bonnie was talking about. Our animal control officer, Kelly Aiken, is here this evening as well. So thank you for joining us. So I had a couple quick questions, if you don't mind me starting off a little bit first.
Sure.
So have seen in other presentations and online the rollers that you can buy.
Coyote roller.
Are they effective?
This is a device to put on the top of your fence, and it's basically a metal tube that when the coyote tries to jump over the fence, Normally they would get traction by putting their paws on the top of the fence and then pushing over. Well, when they hit this rolling bar, they roll backwards. So it is effective at both keeping coyotes from jumping in and keeping dogs from jumping out. So that's the other reason that people have installed those. If they've got a large dog that seems to be able to jump over the fence and get out, they can put a coyote roller on there and it will keep the dog in. Okay. Now, I would never say that, oh, you can install a coyote roller and then let your Yorkie play in the yard unsupervised. Because as we talked about earlier, there's lots of other threats, like great horned owls, that could take a small dog unsupervised.
And then one other question I had was, there's a couple of residents that I've talked to that their assumption is, I saw a coyote today, it was out in the middle of the day, it's got to be sick, it's got to be rabid, we need to do something. So
it's just an urban coyote. And also we see a very predictable pattern every year. During the summer, when the temperature is 100 degrees, coyotes don't want to be out in the daytime, just like we don't want to be out in the heat. So during the summer, coyotes generally are totally nocturnal. And then the calls drop.
Or crepuscular, they do that. You know,
Dawn and dusk, right?
And the golf course at dawn, and I've seen them out there, you know, basking in that early morning light.
But during the fall, and winter, and spring, when the temperatures are mild, they're out in broad daylight chasing squirrels, because that's when the squirrels are out. So it's a very predictable pattern. Also, during the winter, think about it, all the leaves are off the bushes, and so people see the coyotes more. The coyotes are using the same corridors, but they don't have as much cover as they do during the spring and summer. And so that's another reason why we always get a huge spike in calls during the winter about people seeing coyotes.
That's a good point with the foliage.
But it's not that the number of coyotes has increased. It's the same coyotes having the same territories. It's just we see them at different times of the year.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions that you want to ask? No? Okay, well, great. Well, thank you, and if we have other ideas for workshops and things that we can bring to Trophy Club residents, we'll be happy to do that in the future. And yes?
They are selling suits. Have you heard about them? They're coyote-proof dog suits.
Well, I wouldn't use the word proof.
Okay. I laughed when I heard this
Yes.
on the radio.
Oh,
But
the
yes,
ones with the spikes.
yes, so you can
For
walk
$70.
a puppy and a little $70.
Well, actually, the woman who
Zaps.
invented it doesn't walk her dog. She lets her dog out to roam on their acreage. And so this was her way
Really
of
testing that
of
suit.
not being a responsible pet owner, is to come up with this elaborate outfit for the dog to wear. But on their website, it has no guarantee whatsoever that it will keep a dog safe. But it looks funny.
We had a 114-pound pure white German Shepherd when we were down in Corpus Christi. We lived on Padre Island. And it was pretty much just being built out then. And when the bad weather came, and because it was like 120 miles of beach area, so there was where people were camping and stuff. and
Right.
when people weren't going there, they would go through the neighborhood.
Right.
And all we had to do was let Shadow walk outside. And they all took off.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's all about size.
He didn't even run, he just stood there.
Right. It's all about size.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I guess they just assumed he was a wolf.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that real big.
Definitely.
We did have handout tonights, and I'm going to leave those up here for people that want to come pick one up. They can pick one up at the town office. I'll also put them out on the shelter page and my animal page so that people can print them off. And I think
This
Bonnie's
is
got
this
some
is a really
information
good checklist, not only to prevent problems with coyotes, but to prevent problems with squirrels and raccoons and possums. So feel free to take, if you want to take extra and take to your neighbors who weren't able to be here. The other thing I brought is, this is a coupon for a free inspection. So if you hear of anybody who's hearing noises in their ceiling, that's the other thing that 911 Wildlife helps with. is if people have animals that have actually gotten into their attic or underneath their foundation or underneath their deck or underneath their porch. So this is, normally it's $35 for the inspection, but with this coupon it's free.
Great.
I would like to throw in, pardon me, one more thing. Turkey buzzards. That's been a complaint I've been getting a lot lately.
Mhm.
And come pick up this dead animal. There's turkey buzzards on it now. The possum was hit, a turkey buzzard's on it. A squirrel's been hit. I take my time getting there. Reason being is turkey buzzards are nature's trash men. And you
Yes.
know this, Bonnie.
Yes.
So to let them go ahead and kind of clean it up, they won't eat anything more than 24 hours old. It's quite it's quite fascinating if you read about them. And they're absolutely terrified of people. If you read up on them, it's quite fascinating. And they're not as gross as you think. They're opportunistic, just like all this wildlife you see during the day. You know, they shouldn't be eating. Sometimes, yes, the skunks, you know, more often than not, if they're acting strangely, it's due to something, and it's probably going to be rabies. But in general, if it's possums or armadillos are in my yard and I see them, they're just opportunistic. Like you say, they're going where the feeding's good, and they know the right times of day to go find it. Just, you know, shoo them off or leave them be.
If somebody's concerned about having an armadillo tearing up their flower beds or their lawn, rather than setting traps, once again, we want to use this principle of eliminating the food supply. Armadillos and skunks, they don't dig randomly. Remember that equation. They don't have energy to waste. So they only dig where they smell grubs. Grubs are their favorite food. And does everybody know what grubs grow up to be? They grow up to be June bugs. Grubs are baby June bugs. So if you have June bugs hitting your windows at night, you've got June bugs laying eggs in your yard. So what we recommend is the best way to eliminate that food supply so that the armadillo doesn't tear up your yard is to apply something called beneficial nematodes. It's a microscopic worm. It's a biological, organic way of solving armadillo problems because it eliminates the grubs and then the armadillo goes away. Beneficial nematodes, Nematodes. And you can buy them at Callaway's or any organic gardening supply store. Marshall Grain in Grapevine carries them. It's a living organism, so it's kept in the refrigerator. It comes in a little jar in a soil medium, and you mix it with water, and you apply it with like an attachment on your garden hose. And you only have to apply it twice a year. Right now is a perfect time to apply it. We've had all this rain. So you want to apply it now and then again in the fall, and that will mean that you will have no digging from armadillos or skunks in your yard.
Is that dog safe?
Yeah, that's why it's called beneficial nematodes. It doesn't harm fish, frogs, birds, mammals of any kind. They are targeted specifically to underground larvae. So not only do they devour grubs, they also devour fire ant larvae, flea larvae, termite larvae. So even if you don't have an armadillo causing problems, beneficial nematodes are a very good thing to put on your yard right now.
So for the audience that's going to maybe watch this later, the question was, is it safe for dogs that are outside? And the answer is that yes, it is. So good question. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Bonnie.
Thank
Very
you.
much
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
organizing this.
Okay, great.
Flea larvae.